Welcome to the channel. Today, we have for you a tragic and quite sad tale of a man who took the life of his wife and beloved daughter and committed suicide after that. After years of deception and a last-minute change in a life insurance policy and a mysterious note, these are just some of the new details revealed in the double murder of a New England mother and her daughter. And when it all came crumbling down and the family was about to be evicted, he took matters into his own hands. The town of Dover, Massachusetts is one of the most prestigious and expensive in the country. That's where the Kamal family lived in a 21-bedroom mansion, complete with an at-home spa and even a movie theater. The head of the family, Rakesh or Rick, worked for Harvard University, and his wife Tina was a graduate of the same school. Their 18-year-old daughter, Ariana, had attended the private school, Milton Academy, and her tuition was already paid at Middlebury College in Vermont. The family of three lived a picture-perfect life of opulence, but everything is not what it seems. On the outside, folks would have loved to have this life, and ultimately it was Rick who ended up shooting his wife and daughter, and that picture-perfect image was shattered on December 28, 2023, when a mysterious note was discovered inside the Kamals' massive home. That same day, the Kamals were supposed to turn over the keys to their mansion because, as it turned out, they were getting evicted. The keys were on the counter, but so too was a typed-up note on a white sheet of paper. It read, "Please note before entering, call the police and first check 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Each room will be marked by a white sheet of paper." True to his word, there were white sheets of paper marking several rooms on the 2nd floor, each with a horrific scene inside. Ariana and Tina were both found in upstairs bedrooms, murdered by way of a gunshot wound to the head. Rick was found in the bathtub, having turned an unregistered Glock pistol on himself. Before anyone could collect the keys to his home, the idea of being forcibly removed from one's home is incredibly embarrassing and puts a lot of pressure on families, and I think that was just too much for him to handle, and mentally, that's what broke him. Police later said the 20,000-square-foot mansion was immaculate and meticulously maintained, and everything seemed in place, except for the gruesome crime scene on the 2nd floor. The details of the murders shocked the upper-class community where it took place, but upon investigation, there were warning signs as the family had filed for bankruptcy months before the murders, and Rick had even borrowed money from his mother and brother. Also, just days before the murders, Rick altered his wife's $1.25 million life insurance policy. Before that, Rick himself was the beneficiary if Tina died, and after that, their daughter Ariana was set to receive the money. But just 4 days before the murders, Rick changed the policy, and the new beneficiary was set to be his own brother. That raises a red flag when someone changes the beneficiary of a life insurance from a spouse and a child to a sibling. It was this same brother, Manoj Kamal, who had loaned Rick thousands of dollars and would later be the one to find the bodies of his family inside the home. Now with this discovery, Rick's appearance of wealth and affluence came crashing down. The biggest takeaway from this sad tragedy is that Rick and his family were really living a double life, and he apparently was hiding his financial misfortune from his wife and daughter. And when it all came crumbling down and the family was about to be evicted, he took matters into his own hands, killing them and then killing himself. Nima Romani, a trial lawyer and former federal prosecutor, said this is a tale as old as time. People lying about their wealth, and unfortunately, it's been even worse with the explosion of social media when people are trying to flaunt what they don't necessarily have, and eventually it ends up catching up with people. And that's what happened here when it came to the failed business, the failed bankruptcy, and ultimately the eviction from their mansion. Rick's facade of living the American dream began years before he pulled the trigger. At first, it was withholding information like Rick's job. Between 2015 and 2019, he worked as the chief technology officer at Harvard University, but when that changed, he didn't tell his family. Rick actually worked for Harvard, but some of the reports I've seen say that Tina believed he still worked there as recently as last year, but apparently he stopped working there in 2019, so there were some discrepancies between the husband and wife. In this case, not entirely telling each other what was going on. What are your thoughts about things like that? Keeping things from the spouse, especially when their bank accounts are joined. There's certainly evidence that the spouses were potentially keeping information from one another. Rick didn't tell his wife that he was no longer working at Harvard, at least according to the reports. And even Tina said she was educated at Harvard, but when Harvard was contacted, they had no record of her attending there, and Rick maybe embellished some of his academic accomplishments when they were executive education courses and not necessarily university degrees. If you dig a little bit deeper, maybe they were hiding information from one another as well as misleading the public. Without going through their education records, it's going to be tough to say who was lying to whom, and about what stories like these are really tough to cover, and the details never get easier. The misleading continued when Rick began to fall behind on the mortgage payments on his massive home. The developers who worked with Rick spoke to the Boston Globe, saying he made up wild excuses about why the checks were late. Rick once told them he was in India after Tina's father had a heart attack and died. But as it turns out, Tina's father is still alive. Throughout all this, Rick didn't let on about just how dire his financial trouble was. In the months before his death, Rick was in talks to purchase a $6.5 million home in Tennessee that he and Tina had even toured. I think another aspect of this case is that there may not have been an open line of communication between Rick, his wife, and the daughter. It seems, at least according to some of the things I've read, that the wife and mother here wasn't completely aware of what was going on. They actually were touring other mansions to potentially buy. So do you think there are issues in communication here that Rick may have covered up some things according to law enforcement sources? Tina, the wife, didn't really know the dire financial straits the family was in, and I don't think the daughter Ariana knew as well. That was one of the points of tension. But the wife reportedly did say that she was willing to end it all because of the family's financial struggles. Yes, I know what you're referring to. She made some sort of comment where she wanted to drive the family car off a cliff because of their financial issues. Do you think that could have been a red flag that something was going on in the family? It certainly could have been, as financial problems are one of the biggest stresses on a family. It's actually one of the biggest causes of divorce, so it's unclear whether Tina knew the extent of the family's financial problems. Maybe she knew that they were struggling, but to the extent that she was touring a mansion in Tennessee and buying furniture for that anticipated purchase, it's not quite clear whether she knew they were about to be evicted from their Dover mansion. One person who definitely knew about the financial issues was Minaj Kamal, Rick's brother. Speaking of Rick's brother, new details revealed in this case show that he loaned his brother Rick a substantial amount of money, as it was in $5,000 increments over time, but it amassed to, I think, $150,000. Does this show that there's something going wrong? He lives in this 21-room mansion, but is asking his brother to borrow money. Reportedly, Rick owed his brother $500,000, and that was to be paid over the course of several months. That is certainly a red flag, and the brother has spoken up and said that Rick asked him not to say anything to Tina, so that would certainly be a red flag, because a husband is concealing a loan of that amount from his wife. On December 23rd was the last time Minaj saw his brother, and according to the police report obtained by the Boston Globe, Rick asked Minaj to, quote, give him life insurance beneficiary information, which Minaj thought was unusual. The next day, on December 24th, Rick sent a fax to the life insurance company requesting that Minaj become the beneficiary to Tina's policy. And if we're talking about red flags, one that really stood out to me is the change in the life insurance policy. This is just a couple of days before the murder happens that Rick changes the insurance policy for the beneficiary for his wife when and if she dies. Do you think that's something that the insurance company should have had alarm bell going off for, or the family who was hearing about this? What do you make of that? It's certainly a red flag when someone changes the beneficiary of a life insurance from a spouse and a child to a sibling. And that's really what happened here. And it wasn't even Tina's own sibling, it was her brother-in-law. And this change was faxed shortly before the murder-suicide. Tina's brother, who is the executor of her estate, is challenging this change because we have a $1.25 million life insurance policy that's going to be paid to Rick's family. Tina's brother is challenging that now. And if that challenge is successful, obviously for the lawyers are paid, and then the cost of the estate and probate are paid, and any creditors were paid. But if there's money left over, it would actually go to neither of the siblings if the challenge is successful. It would go to Tina's parents in India because she apparently died without a will. That's very interesting. I'm glad that you kind of laid that out because we had seen reports that there was an ongoing dispute between both of the families who was going to get the money. But it's interesting that you pointed out her family would then get it. As far as the civil side of things, when they're going head-to-head about this, who becomes the beneficiary? The biggest issue if the life insurance benefits are to be paid is, was Tina's signature valid when that change was made? Tina's brother is reportedly saying that it wasn't. On December 28th, Minaj went to his brother's home, concerned that he hadn't heard from Rick in a while. And when Minaj entered the mansion, the alarm was blaring, but it was something else that caught his attention. If we're talking about new details in this case, the one that really stood out is the note that the brother found when he entered the home. Printed up, typed up, and kind of instructed whoever was reading the note that they should contact police. And what he finds is a double murder and a suicide. Have you ever heard of anything like this? These white pieces of paper left around the mansion. I've covered a lot of cases over the past 20-plus years, and I haven't seen multiple suicide notes like this spread out all over the home. One apparently for each of the victims in this case. That's not something that you typically see, but it appears to be the case here according to the Boston Globe. The Kamal family purchased the $4 million mansion in February 2019 and used mostly borrowed money for the purchase. The terms of the purchase meant there was a 2-year deadline to pay back Wilsondale Associates, the company that built the mansion. By February 2021, they owed $3.8 million, and the following September, the family was still living in the home when Tina filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy. She listed liabilities between $1 and $10 million, but the case was dismissed a month later. A full year before the murders in December 2022, the Kamals were ordered to leave the home, but they didn't, and the eviction proceedings continued into May 2023. By December of last year, foreclosure was imminent, and Rick agreed his family would turn over the keys on December 28, 2023, the same day as the murders. And we've talked a lot about the warning signs as far as the bankruptcy or the issues financially. But the big thing about this exact day is that the keys for the home were set to be collected. That was the day of the foreclosure eviction. They had to leave the home. Do you think that was the final straw, so to speak, leading up to this murder-suicide? I believe that the foreclosure was the final financial straw that really put pressure on Rick and the family. Obviously, the business had failed, the bankruptcy had been unsuccessful, and he owed significant sums of money to his family and to his business, but being forcibly removed from one's home is incredibly embarrassing and puts a lot of pressure on families, and I think that was just too much for him to handle. And mentally, that's what broke him. When investigators got to the scene, they found the home in immaculate condition in the backyard pond. They later discovered cell phones, laptops, iPads, and a surveillance DVR box that had been thrown into the water that combined with the details of the notes. Rick's brother is the key witness in this case, and the renewed interest in the Kamal family case comes with new details revealed about the investigation just this month. The reason that we're talking about this case today is because the Boston Globe filed an open records request with Massachusetts State Police about this case. They wanted to know about the investigation, and there was a 62-page report that was handed over. So clearly someone is doing their job going in and finding out more information about the case as far as the investigation. Individuals who are dead, you want to conduct a complete and thorough investigation. And even though there may be no criminal prosecution, there still is this likely financial litigation over the life insurance proceeds and whether there was some fraud or a forgery committed. So even if the murder can't be investigated, maybe the fraud can be, and those life insurance proceeds can go to the rightful person. Is there anything else you expect that investigators, detectives, law enforcement would be searching for? I think the investigation is probably wrapped up by now. I think the only remaining issue is the life insurance, and if it's going to be paid, and whether it should be paid to the family members or creditors, because ultimately, I don't think anyone aside from Rick was involved in this murder, and it's just a question of was the change of beneficiary legitimate or was it a forgery? I think once that investigation concludes and any related civil litigation, I think we're going to put this case to bed, though the investigation may be wrapped up. The facts of the crime, a father murdering his own wife and daughter, are still shocking. I think the big thing about this case is really just the shocking nature of it. As we've seen the pictures, they look like a lovely, happy family. This is something no one expected and is just this crazy tragedy. Do you think this is something that potentially could have been prevented? There's no question that this could have been prevented. And like you said, this was someone who folks thought was living the American dream, who immigrated here from India and was working at the Harvard Business School online. They sent their kids to the best and most prestigious private schools they were involved in, charities, and they lived in a 20-plus bedroom mansion in one of the most prestigious cities in the entire country, and most expensive. On the outside, folks would have loved to have this life, and ultimately, it was Rick who will end up killing his wife and daughter, which makes it so tragic. I think the biggest takeaway is appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone is flaunting their wealth or lives in an expensive home doesn't necessarily mean they're wealthy, and the vice versa is true. Someone could be living a modest life and being insanely wealthy. The other big takeaway is just knowing how much financial pressure and what it can do to a family or a family member. It can cause individuals to leave their family, get divorced, or even pay the ultimate price, which is take their own life or to kill their loved ones. Just this month, the family members fighting over Tina's insurance policy agreed to settle outside of court, though it's still unclear who will receive the payment.